Welcome! In this series of short videos, we will look at topics for the PowerBasic Windows compiler. Today we will look at the use of status bars on Windows forms. Today we're going to be looking at status bars. We are currently within the PowerBasic Forms Designer, and the dialog we have on screen has now got a status bar at the bottom of the form. We achieve this by double-clicking on the status bar control icon in the toolkit. This adds our status bar to the bottom of the dialog. If we attempt to add a second status bar, PowerBasic Forms will tell us that you may only have one status bar control per dialog. While this is true when using PB Forms, you can actually have a second status bar at the top of the dialog. However, we'll have a look at that shortly in the code. So having added our status bar and click Save, we can now go back to the code. So if we run our application now, we'll see our dialog appears on the screen with the status bar at the bottom. So we're now going to go into the callback function, the event handler, and put some code in to populate our status bar. And we'll put that code in the initialize dialog event. If we just want to put a piece of text straight into the status bar, we can use the control set text command to do that quite easily. If we run that code now, we will see that the words ready for work appear at the bottom of the screen within the status bar. While this works nicely when you want just a straightforward piece of text in the status bar, there are other things we can do with the status bar. And to do those, we need to use the statusbar set text command. It takes a number of parameters. I'm going to set these parameters up as local variables to allow us to change them quite easily. So we have a variable to hold the text that's going to appear in the status bar. We have an item, which in this case is going to be item number 1, and we have a style which we're setting to 0 at the moment. And we can use the statusbar set text command to populate our status bar. It takes a number of parameters. The first two are the obvious ones, the handle of the dialog and the handle of the control we wish to set the text on. The next three parameters are the item number, the style and the actual text. If we run that code now, we will see it does exactly what the control set text command did. It puts the words ready for work in the status bar. However, the status bar can do more. You can divide the status bar into a number of sections, up to a maximum of 32. We can then define these sections by numbers. These quantities are either pixels or dialog units, depending on how your dialog has been specified. So with this piece of code, statusbar set parts, we're defining that this status bar is going to have 4 sections. The first section is going to be 80 dialog units wide, the next section is 50, the next is 100, and the final section I've marked as 9999. This is wider than the dialog units for the whole form. How this would be interpreted by PowerBasic is that the fourth section would go all the way to the right to the end of the status bar. We can now use the statusbar set text command to populate the text within our status bar. So we will comment out the original piece of code, and we will put the new command in, which will refer to our item number 1. And it will put the word first in the first item. If we run that code now, we will see the word first appears in the first of 4 sections. So to save a little bit of typing here, I'm going to use the prefix command. This will allow us to put each of these sections in with the minimal amount of typing. So we will now populate the 4 sections of our status bar with the words first, second, third and last. If we run that code now, we will see that these pieces of text appear in each of the sections designated. So having the ability to set sections on the status bar means they can hold different types of information. If, for example, you wish to track the user's mouse on the screen, you could put the X and Y coordinates in 2 separate sections in your status bar. Or if you want to impart some information to the user, for example, to say that the caps lock is on, you could use this quite easily. So what else can we do with status bars? As well as dividing the status bar up into sections, what we're going to do next is to use the Wingdings font to put a symbol in as text. So we're going to create a new font. But first we will comment out the status bar commands we've already used. And we're going to call a new function, which we will create in a moment, called makeFontEx. This is going to set up our Wingdings font at 12 point and in bold. So in order to get this next section of code to work, we're going to have to create some local variables at the top of our callback function. A static variable for the font handle, and then a number of other variables which we'll cover as we get to them. So let's first create the makeFontEx function. This of course takes the parameters we've seen before. The font as a string, the point size, is it bold, is it italic, is it underlined, or is it strike through? And we're going to be calling a number of Windows APIs within this function. And we're going to be creating another function called enumCharSet. This function is quite generic and can be used for a range of fonts. And finally in this function, we're going to call the Windows API function createFont, passing it the details in order to create our font reference, and passing the value back to our calling function. We have also referenced another function which we'll need to create now, the enumCharSet. This gets us back the type of the character set. Is it an ANSI font or is it a symbol font? And in this case, we're using a symbol font. So now that we've created these two functions, we now have to go back to the callback function, because we're now going to have an owner-drawn area of this status bar. But first, as we've created a font within this application, we want to destroy it once the form has actually been completed. So we're going to create a destroy event, which will be triggered when the form is closed down. And if that's the case, it will call the Windows API call delete object, passing it the font handle. So now we come to the owner-drawn parts of the code. This will be another event called drawItem. In this particular application, there is only one object on screen which we're going to be using ownerDraw for. However, it's good practice to actually test to see if that's the one we're doing. You may at some later point add additional owner-drawn controls to our dialog. So it's important to test to make sure we're doing the right one. So we can do that with a simple if statement on the wparam of the callback function. Does that match the control we want to do something with, in this case, the status bar? As we have two status bars on the control, we don't want to populate the wrong one. For the Windows API calls, the status bar part count is 0 based. So the first item, the first section of the status bar is part count number 0. So we can pick that up from the lparam option. And since the section of the status bar we're interested in is effectively the second section, this is part number 1. Now we need to select the object, defining our font and the color and drawing the text onto the status bar. And we're going to have to define a constant here. This is for the character within the Wingdings font that we want to use. So we'll define that at the beginning of our code. So we're using character number 60 to define the diskette image in the Wingdings font. So having completed the section for owner drawing the part of the status bar, we now have to actually pick up the event which has been clicked on. So we're going to create another section in our code called wmNotify. This will be the notify event in our callback function. And again, we need to test to see what it is that's actually been clicked on. And we can use this pointer, nmm, with our header to use the ID from to see if it matches our status bar constant. So we're testing ID from for the status bar constant, and we're testing to see if the nm click event has been triggered. So we know the status bar has been clicked on, but which part of the status bar? So we can use the item spec option on this to determine which one it's been done. This again is 0 based, and we're looking for number 1, which is the second section. And we're using the variable long disk as a toggle. This allows us in the owner draw section to actually change the colour from red to grey and back again. So before we run our code, we'll need to put the statusbar set parts command back in, and to define the second section of the statusbar as being owner drawn. So there is our set parts command. We're using 3 sections of the statusbar, one 80 dialog units wide, one 16, which is where our icon is going to go, and the third section will take up the rest of the statusbar. We're going to print the words click disk in the first section, and in the second section we're going to make that owner drawn. And we're using this as the character we're going to be printing in from the Wingdings font. So if we try running that code now, we will see our status bar has now been updated. It has the words click disk, and we have the icon on the status bar, which is a floppy disk. If we click on that, we'll see that the icon turns red. So it's identified it's been clicked on. If you click on it once more, it will turn back to grey again. So can we make use of this click event to actually perform some function? Let's go back to the event handler again. In here we can put a test to trigger when the icon is clicked. For example, we can send a message to the user using a message box, and then we can sleep for 2 seconds to simulate some kind of saving event happening, and we can then change the colour of the diskette icon back to grey again, and then redraw the control so the user can actually see what's happened. So if we try running that code, there is our status bar. If we click on it, it goes red and our message box pops up. If we click OK, it should wait 2 seconds and then change the colour of the icon back to grey, which it does. So we mentioned earlier that it was possible to create a second status bar. Our status bar at the moment is at the bottom of the screen. If we want to put another status bar on the screen, we can put one at the top of the dialog. If we go back to the function where the dialog was specified, we'll need to do this outside the PB Forms section, because PB Forms only allows one status bar. So there is our control add status bar command with the option of CCS top. This will place the status bar at the top of the dialog. And we can additionally put a couple of other options in, client edge and static edge. Before we run that code, we'll need to specify this new constant, this IDC statusbar 2 at the beginning of our code. And now we can attempt to run the code. And this gives us a second status bar at the top of the screen. And you can click on this quite happily, and it does not trigger the events at the bottom status bar. They only happen when you click on that. And if you click on other parts of the status bar, the one that are not icons, nothing happens. So in summary, what we've done today is we have added 2 status bars to our dialog, one at the top of the dialog and one at the bottom. Additionally, we've shown you can actually segment your status bar into up to 32 sections, and you can print data, either text or numbers, to each of these sections. These can be updated in your code at any point within the application, giving feedback to the user on what the application is actually doing. Additionally, we have created an icon using a Wingdings font on the bottom status bar, allowing us to display what appears to the user as an icon. We can test to see if this icon has been clicked on, and we can change the colour to give feedback to the user. This allows you to have a hook inside the code to allow you to do other functions when the user has actually clicked on one of your icons. Hopefully you'll find this code useful in your applications, but that's it for today. Thank you for watching.